Hello, I'm Lawrence Malthouse. I am the Solution Sales Director at Gamma. I'm joined here today by Mark and Hannah. So we're here to talk about the role that managed networks play for the modern day retailer, how they support their digital initiatives. We know that the retail vertical sector is extremely challenging. So we're going to discuss some of the themes around how those modern day networks help support those digital initiatives. So really, I think the first question is, I'm going to go fairly high level here. Obviously, we work with a lot of retailers. So what do you think are the key challenges that today's retailers face?
I think on a macro level, it's things like climate change, Brexit, inflation, and the Ukraine. I think, though, if you dig a little bit further down into the micro challenges, it's really around changing customer experience and customer preferences and the personalization that comes with that, changes to e-commerce and the rise of AI and IoT, the complexities of the supply chains, and I think the introduction of omnichannel and how that fits into all of the above.
Okay, so let's just break that down a little bit. We know that to be competitive in the retail market space, retailers have to make shrewd decisions about where they invest their technology, and often that's offset with a lot of, I guess, aging legacy technology. So the retailer really has to think about that end-to-end customer journey and how that technology is going to actually improve that experience. So you mentioned the rise of e-commerce and omni. How do retailers use technology, and what are the sort of trends they're looking at to actually I guess, help with that particular area?
So I think with e-commerce, customers have seen quite a big shift. Obviously, many years ago, they moved into e-commerce via, let's say, their websites selling directly. But that model's changed quite a lot today. So you've got the things like marketplaces. So just taking a commission from selling other products, and you've got the rise of home deliveries, the Deliveroo and the Ubers, etc. So retailers must be able to integrate into their systems and allow the picking of products very quickly, because while things like home deliveries are great, we're now moving into an environment where you want those products immediately. So click and collect was brought in by a particular retailer and very successful. You could buy online and go and collect it within 30 minutes. People are now demanding that type of service when it comes to deliveries. So your Deliveroos and your Ubers offer that, but staff must be able to pick those products for a deliverer to come and collect and deliver it to your house. So you must have always on connectivity and the staff in the shop to be able to go and pick those products.
Okay, and what are the particular, I guess, digital procurement choices that retailers are making to actually support some of those initiatives?
I think that really depends on the retailer themselves. So what are you selling? And what are your potential margins? So if you're a supermarket, for example, very large volumes going through, very transactional, then things like your margins are probably quite thin. So anything to do with productivity gains, as you've mentioned, electronic shelves, that can all automate your supply chain and make sure shelves are stocked with the right products at the right time. So your supermarket is probably going to be more inclined to, or a high volume supermarket is probably going to be a lot more inclined to invest in things like digital shelving instead of a convenience store, for example. You've then got, if you take a clothes retailer, for example, probably selling slightly more expensive items, probably making a higher margin. So they're probably going to be investing in things like RFID, and then obviously you need to be able to track those tags to understand what your stock is in the store, and potentially how that stock's moving around and potentially leaving the store without being paid for.
And I guess that leans into your first point, Hannah, around that sort of supply chain complexity. And as you mentioned, some of those macro challenges that retailers have been faced with. Can you just give us a little bit of insight, I guess, into how customers or retailers are using technology to keep that competitive edge throughout their supply chains.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting because there's so much beyond that shop front that you necessarily see. And as Mark said, the technology on the shop floor is really important, but also of most importance is that data. So it's making sure that the data from those shop floors is being transmitted to and from the warehouses, to and from the distribution centres in the right way, at the right time, in the right amounts, to make sure that the stock itself is turning up. But also before you even get to the stock, if you're dealing with a supermarket, for example, the actual produce, perhaps, making sure that you have, let's say, automated robots, automated shelf stacking, making sure that at the end of the day, the supply chain is always giving that customer what they need. You're being proactive, not reactive. It's not that a shelf is now empty and then you're having to go to the warehouse and say, okay, now we need to stock this. You're trying to create an environment where that product is already there, ready to be stocked, and there is no delay. It is, at the end of the day, serving that customer and improving that customer journey from end to end before the customer even gets to the shelves themselves.
So, okay, that's great. So we've talked about electronic shelf labeling. We've talked about, I guess, RFID. And I guess the impact that has on some of the supply chain initiatives. Let's just move on from that. You know, where are some of the other areas that retailers are looking to invest in technology in the shop?
I think it's around engaging with the customer. How can they engage with the customer on multiple levels? I think with quite a few different industries, it's how your customer wants to engage with you. You'll find that different generations want to engage in a very different way with you. A shop is slightly different because you're physically in it, and therefore you're automatically engaging anyway, whether that just be with a shelf full of products. But it's how you can potentially electronically engage with the customer, whether that be in a reactive or a proactive way. So, for example, you can integrate in the app, making sure you're trying to get people to log into the app while in the store. So you might be offering them, if you're in store and you engage with your app, then we'll double the points, double the discount, whatever it may be. So once you're doing that, you can then start understanding who's in the store at what time, what they've bought historically, and start potentially throwing further discounts at them for particular products.
And we're having a lot of discussions with retailers, obviously, about blanket Wi-Fi coverage, because you clearly need a good work to support those types of insights into customers. And that goes even further in that looking at, I guess, things like CCTV to gather a full picture of what the customer's actually doing. Just expand on some of those areas for me.
Well, I think Wi-Fi is absolutely key these days, because it's not just about engaging with customers, but as you've mentioned, potentially into your security. And cameras aren't just about security today; they're about a lot more, which we'll talk about a bit more. But it's also, we've mentioned delivery and Uber. You know, all of these services require full Wi-Fi throughout the store to be able to work effectively. So Wi-Fi is absolutely critical, and making sure you allocate enough speed for each of those services on the Wi-Fi network. So having I don't think you need a cutting edge Wi-Fi solution, but you certainly need a up-to-date Wi-Fi solution. So trying to remove very old legacy Wi-Fi is probably quite critical to a retailer at this stage.
Yeah.
So we've talked about engaging with the customer. You could engage with the app. I think you're going to start seeing you've been able to log onto the app, select which store you're going to, and it can potentially start telling you which products are where in the store, instead of walking aimlessly up and down aisles trying to find your favourite, whatever it may be. So I think those types of initiatives will come into the app. You see pickers going around large supermarkets on a Saturday morning. Where do they know where all the products are? Products are being moved around in the store all the time. So you need to be able to keep that up to date. So making them more productive, potentially if you make them more productive, you need less of them, and that potentially brings in a large amount of
And I guess
cost.
this comes into shopping habits, which have changed again after COVID. It's appreciating that customers buy products in different ways. This need to be fully informed and have this information at your fingertips when they're on premise to actually make some of those savvy buying decisions that they currently maybe wouldn't have thought about 3 or 4 years ago. I guess from a Wi-Fi perspective, it's just an expectation that they will be able to have that type of connectivity in store to make those decisions.
Well, and there are some clothing stores, especially on the high street at the moment, that have very cleverly worked out there's a niche where people may go into a store and see the queue and decide they don't want to queue that long, but they still want to buy the product. So as Mark said, certain apps have features where you can scan the barcode of the item you want to buy. It adds it to your online basket. You can try the item on, put the item back on the shelf, leave, and have that item delivered to your door within 24 hours. So you haven't had to queue up. You've been able to go do other things with your time, which I think is, especially in a younger generation, is really important. People want to maximize the time. They don't necessarily want to peruse in the way that they would have previously. But that item is still purchased, even if it's actually purchased online, despite being in the store. And I think you said previously about the importance of Wi-Fi, Mark. I think that also extends into third parties. Third parties are a massive part of supermarkets, of any real retail network now, because people often want to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So you want to be able to turn up and collect your Amazon parcel at the same time that you do your shopping. And in order to do that, you need a Wi-Fi that can support all of those third parties, those lockers, those distribution centres, those parcel pickup spots. People don't want to have to go to 4 or 5 different shops to get something done. They want one, and for that you need a resilient and broad enough bandwidth to support all of those different parties.
I think it goes beyond that, and actually retailers have a large ecosystem of suppliers that they're working with day to day, and really from that managed service, it's the ability to fit into that existing ecosystem of suppliers and not just elevate services through your own platforms, but help bring everyone's service offering up and elevate that by the way you communicate and the way that you share access to certain tools. So actually, all of a sudden, you're creating this I guess subset of suppliers that are working efficiently and effectively together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolute paramount. It takes more than one person to run, or more than one company to run a lot of big retail networks. And I think your MSP should also know at what point their expertise is maybe not as great as someone else would be. And I think having an MSP who can own all those relationships for you, who can put in all the different companies and say, we understand that you may know more about this than we do, but actually we can help manage that, we can help triage that, we can make sure that when something does go wrong, you have one point of call, one area to raise, that is really, really important, because that then frees up time for the actual employees of that particular retail company to spend their time working on other initiatives. Like Mark said, being proactive, not reactive, not looking at a problem and going, oh, what do we do? But having a process in place that if before anything even goes down, they know exactly where to go to, they know how to fix it, and everyone works together as one ecosystem behind closed doors.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. It's that typical finger pointing, going through multiple layers, going through multiple help desks, and actually the problem never getting resolved. So I think it's really important that the MSP has that ability to work closely with those third parties, to give those third parties, where appropriate, access to tooling platforms that obviously we use as a company to make sure that any problem is resolved quicker, and the impact to the business is obviously lessened as a result of that.
And to the end user and to the customer, because at the end of the day, if that Wi-Fi is down, who's really the one that suffers? Often the customer, whether that's because there isn't a product on the shelf that there needs to be, or because they don't have access to the items or the elements of the store that they were promised. And so, as I think someone said to begin with, it really is about optimizing that customer journey and driving the tech through that customer perspective end to end.
Yeah, so I think if you look traditionally, the role of the managed service provider was somewhat sort of siloed to looking at bandwidth and purely networks and uptime and downtime and running maintenance contracts. What we're seeing now is actually a fairly complex supply ecosystem where all those suppliers have to perform well together and communicate together to help our retailers drive those digital initiatives. I was wondering whether you had any thoughts around that.
Absolutely agree with you. I think we've talked about more and more technology going into a retail store, and as that becomes an even greater number of devices, then you're going to get a greater number of suppliers that rely and interlinking with each other. So they need to, your managed service provider needs to be able to open up its support into multiples of these suppliers to be able to deliver a service back to the customer. So you've got to remove yourself from just your little silo and work as a team. Even though you're competitors, you've got to work as a team to be able to deliver that service back to the customer.
I guess this sort of leads into initially understanding our retailers' business better. Again, I guess when you're looking at purely from a network point of view, you need to understand the impact that that network will have on the edge site. But as you get closer to the core of that retail business, working with third-party suppliers, you're expected to drive real value, aren't you? So it's how's that measured, and what role are you playing within that?
Yeah, I think as a network provider, we need to understand everything going onto that network and who supplies it, and being able to work with them instead of just saying it's not our fault and point the finger at somebody else. You've actually got to diagnose where the problem is and make sure the people responsible for that particular element go and fix the problem as fast as possible, instead of burning as much time as possible just pointing fingers at each other. At the end of the day, that's a bad outcome for the customer.
I think it's one thing saying this, but just from your experience, how do you go about then doing that? How do you walk into that pool of third parties, and what do you do? What information do you share? How do you share it? How does that pan out?
I think the old adage of, fail to prepare, prepare to fail is really important there. I think you have to make sure that at a foundation level, you have a really good understanding of how each one of those businesses works on their basis. So then you know how you can integrate into that. I think you have to be really aware of the relationships that are necessary. Who is the key stakeholder within each of those teams that you need to be linking into? How do their support networks or how does their support desks work? So when that call comes in, you know who to fire it out to, but also they know who to come to on our side as well. I think we are competitors, but at the end of the day, we're all looking to achieve the same goal, which is the best customer experience for this customer that we can achieve. And so I think it is a case of working together, really making sure you have a clear list of assumptions, clear list of dependencies, make sure everyone knows where their demarc lies, but also is willing to take responsibility at that line and not just say it's not my problem, I'm not going to concern myself. So this is where my demarc ends, but I'm going to work with you to try and understand how you can pick up from this point when I release that.
Yeah, and I guess how as a managed service provider we can then help upskill on that help desk to help desk scenario. What tools do we have that we can share with that help desk? How can we train the members of that help desk and upskill them so actually their demarc changes slightly as well, so you get the blurring of lines where you're sharing data, you're sharing information to make sure that ultimately the fault is resolved as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really working with the customer to understand what it is that they're trying to achieve, because I think definitely we see that customers come to us with a goal and they have one defined way of trying to get there. They haven't really necessarily considered other ways to achieve the same outcome. So really digging into the why and the how the customer wants to achieve that, and then working out if there's maybe a more effective way to do it through that upskilling through that relationship management is really important. I think as well, customers are really asking us to overlay a level of bespoke SLA into the contract. I think given the nature of the 24/7 on network and essentially because customers are so much more demanding now than they have been, they've got so much more choice, they really need us to not put standard paperwork in front of them. Each site type has a specific SLA. Each site is different from another one. Or in some cases, lots of sites need to be bucketed up into one area. I think gone are the days where these are our SLAs. Do they work for you or not? I think now it has to be, tell us what you need, what matters to you, where are your sore spots if you have outages, and how can we bespoke those SLAs to support you as best we can.
I guess every store's a P1.
Yeah,
they're all as critical as each other, and like we've seen with all the technology and the technology platforms that are running within these stores, if they go offline, then they can't trade. So it's very easy for that retailer to then quantify how much money they're losing as a result of that store going down. Hence why they see everything as a P1.
Yeah, exactly.
So look, clearly we're seeing the role that the network plays here. This is really giving our customers that competitive advantage. And how often do we walk into the scenario where the retailer is technology dead-ended? They're at a point where their business has transformed so much, but the underlying foundations simply can't support that. So what are the things that come to mind when you think about a great managed service provider and how they can actually introduce and embrace new technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a cliche, but you do really want a managed service provider who does live and breathe your business, who thinks about your business as much as you do, if not more. And I think that comes in two ways. The first is making sure that you always have the flexibility within your contract to upgrade technology. You don't end up in a situation where you've bought a technology that in 2 years is now irrelevant, something else has been brought in to replace it, and now you can't do anything about that. And I think that's about getting in front of your competitors, but I think it's also about getting in front of your customers. I think you want to be driving initiatives rather than necessarily responding to initiatives, making sure that your network provider is almost consulting or helping you design a network, constantly moving forward, constantly providing that next level of technology and that next level of service to your customers. So your customers are not getting to the point where they're complaining. They're not getting to a point where you're losing market share, where you're losing ROI, or your bottom line is being affected because your network is no longer suitable. You always want to be in that position where your managed service provider is really working with you to constantly push those boundaries of what can we do, how can we change, and they're being proactive. They're coming to you and saying, look, we've got this idea, there's a new product, there's a new technology, we think we can optimize, we can make this more efficient.
Yeah, but it's just amazing how many retailers still are working within those confines of contracts which are product for term, which we're still seeing all the time. It's legacy kit, legacy bandwidth, old technology that's just sitting there. The provider has no incentive to change because why would they? And they're still making margin from the network. And as a result, really, I guess the retailer feels that because there's no value being added, they can't then lean on the managed service provider to inform them of what's coming next because they can't do anything anyway. So it's a bit of a stalemate situation.
Yeah, and if we've spoken about anything today, it's that the landscape moves so quickly. You really do need to be in a position where you can be flexible and agile. Gone are the days where you can just have one piece of kit and it serves you for however many years. Customers are demanding, partners are demanding, shareholders and executives are demanding, and you need to make sure that the network at a foundation level is able to support that.
I think moving forward, I think that the next big wave will be satellite, and I think that's going to have a real big impact on retailers and how they work. I appreciate that it's we're at the sort of early stages of satellite adoption as a technology, but where do you see that type of satellite connectivity playing within our customers' estates?
I think satellite certainly has a place today, which is probably more around your fast startup, your greenfield sites. I think certainly the mobile providers will be hoping mobile probably fits that bill more than your satellite providers, but there's no reason why you just don't skip a technology as in moving from physical, you skip your mobile and straight into satellite. As they become more and more known, you've got more and more companies launching low Earth orbit satellites, so it's just going to become more and more competitive.
Yeah, totally agree.
And I think that leads back into the flexible point about new site openings and store closing. Retail landscape moves so quickly, you need to be able to spin up new stores, close down other ones, repurpose kit, repurpose people, and not get stuck in a rut where everything requires paperwork and everything requires 80-day lead times and leaves. You need to be able to move at a pace that maybe only satellite and mobile can achieve.
But I think a lot of this comes down to how companies, and especially retailers, procure these services. As we've mentioned before, I think there's a real focus in RFPs on the technology, and there's not enough focus on the service, the type of contract I'm going to be signing, the commitments from the managed service provider. So are you going to be running monthly service reviews? Are we going to do quarterly technology reviews? Am I going to have the flexibility in the contract to move technologies? I don't think there's been enough focus in their procurement cycle.
I agree. I think the way companies procure is the same way that they did 5 years ago, and that's gone. I'd really encourage any customer, let alone retailers, to actually get involved, come and meet us, look under the hood, sit with the support people, understand the culture of the organisation, making sure it's a good fit, because ultimately it's a partnership which is going to go on 5-10 years. This is not just providing a technology. This is hearts and minds and standing toe to toe with us and making sure that when something happens, you've got a team behind you that you can trust that will react quickly. And that's the true value, in my opinion, of a managed service provider.